It's just fantastic. I'm going to start this video by saying one thing quite clearly. I have written no notes for this video. I have no idea how I'm going to structure this video, but I know I want to talk about this particular topic, so I also have to include a disclaimer. I am well aware of the accusations levied at Jake Paul prior to his contest. Air quotes around the word contest. I'd rather use the word mismatch. We are not going to discuss the accusations levied at Jake Paul. They are not relevant to this particular topic. That topic has been covered quite recently by others and has led to many accusations at YouTube for burying videos on the subject because he appears to be YouTube's golden boy. There might be a point to that, but I'd also like to point out that particular type of subject matter usually gets buried because advertisers don't want to be associated with that kind of subject. So instead we are going to focus our energies on Jake Paul's boxing career. For this we have to go back to DxyzD. Now I am working on a content constable on DxyzD, so this is going to feature there. The shorter version of this particular story is Jake Paul stopped DxyzD. There is more to that. It was exposed by Randolph in a diss track on DxyzD, because DxyzD can't take a joke, and before the fight was taking edibles. It was also exposed by his brother JJ that he did not, DxyzD that is, do sparring, training, prepping, cardio of any kind. He was lazy, so when he actually managed to hurt Jake Paul, he was unable to press the advantage, thereby giving Jake Paul a green and gold amateur WBC belt and what he believed in his head to be legitimacy. Then you move on to Gib. Gib is actually quite talented, but Gib seemed to forget his footwork. If you crouch down low, the one thing you shouldn't be seen doing is having both your feet in line with each other, because if you do get punched and you have to stagger back because of the force of it, it is always better to have one behind to apply enough force that you are able to stay upright, thereby limiting the chances of your gloves hitting the floor. Gib also, by extension, went on to lose to Jake Paul, making Jake Paul look even more legitimate. Air quotes around that word. Jake Paul then moved on, because he wants to fight JJ, but JJ doesn't really care. JJ got the win over Logan Paul, and Logan Paul has become a much better person because of it, after he appealed and was rejected. Jake Paul, though, has gotten an inflated sense of arrogance, entitlement, and superiority, which was further proven when he got in the ring with a former NBA player, and a very simple 1-2 combo knocked him spark out. There was much criticism about that. The criticism that really struck was the fact that he managed to nail that combo. Usually you're not able to do so as easily as he did, but it turns out if you have zero actual knowledge of boxing, yeah, you're going to get hit with a 1-2 combo. It's also worth adding that having a glass jaw plays a part. The reason we bring this up is for obvious reasons, because Jake Paul over the weekend fought a former MMA fighter. This former MMA fighter has been proven to actually be able to take quite good punches when his back is on a mat and he's been hammer punched by someone above him. That does not mean he can take punches standing up, but with the right discipline, time, effort, and commitment, his opponent could well have managed to stop his legs from turning to jelly the moment he struck, which would have been fantastic had that actually been the case. You see, Jake Paul went on and won with a 1-2 combo, which has led to many accusations that Jake Paul's fights are rigged. I'm not going to join in on that. My attention is actually drawn on something else. It is the superiority that Jake Paul currently feels for the skill set he is showing in the very limited time he's in a ring. 3 fights, excluding DxyzD, have all ended very quickly because of rudimentary mistakes made by his opponents. And then when you look at the opponents, you realize this is a very padded career. Padded in the sense of like a lot of people who are worth a lot of money or can generate a lot of money. They don't have to fight actual fighters, actual boxers, people who have pedigree perhaps, because in reality they're not looking to legitimize themselves as an actual fighter. They're doing the one thing that they can do best, and that is make money. This is quite common in the early careers of certain Olympians, who have a very padded early career until they get to a world title. They can choose to have a softer career for a while if they want, or they can throw themselves in at the deep end and prove they are more than just muscle. I'm using Anthony Joshua as an example if anyone wasn't noticing or knows nothing of boxing. Pete Davidson mocked the living feck out of this as an announcer, air quotes around that word, and there was a rumour circulating that he did in fact raise the allegations against Jake Paul to Jake Paul's face. That's very brave, but he does raise some points within the video that I'm going to link down below on this subject. The idea of punching or being better than your opponents in such a vast mismatch that you yourself think you're just that damn good. You sniff your own farts and they smell of roses, made by Supreme. And the annoying thing with Jake Paul is, he is both good and bad for boxing. And that's a really strange thing to say. He is good for boxing because he draws attention to the sport from more casual fans, and of course his stans. The same gullible stans that managed to convince their parents to part ways with $60 to watch him two-punch Ben Askren. He is good because he generates money for the sport, because those people, some of whom may well go on to watch others because they get a taste for it. Hopefully, by extension, those same people will then go to watch real fighters and realize Jake Paul's rubbish. He really is. But he's also bad for the sport of boxing. And this is where the more purist mentalities come into it, that which could be considered antiquated. It's the idea of a sport built on honor, respect, integrity, years of hard work as an amateur to go pro, some going through Commonwealth, European, World Championships, Olympics as an amateur, to then come up as a professional, doing the domestic scene and then moving on to the international and then the world level. Whereas Jake Paul used his YouTube channel, was on the back of the Logan Paul JJ fight, the first one, and he beat JJ's brother, all because Deji couldn't be bothered to train. Again, I will hammer him for this one in the Content Constable. I promise you that. I watched that fight. I was hardly impressed. So what does Jake Paul do now? Now that he's beaten Ben Askren, who has since gone on to admit he is no longer going to compete in combat sports, which is the right decision. Jake Paul ideally should fight somebody who is an actual fighter in their prime. Jake Paul himself claims himself to be on their levels anyway, if you believe half the stuff he says coming from his flatulence. Or he should fight somebody who could well be on his level, possibly slightly better. A fight that people want to see on YouTube especially. But this then comes into whether or not the opponent would want to fight Jake Paul and put up with all the rigmarole and the banter from promoting the fight. That being the currently more Music Man-oriented KSI, aka JJ, Deji's brother. Because, by extension, Jake Paul could go on to avenge his brother's loss. Or, fingers crossed, by extension, JJ beats him. I don't care if it's a split decision. Beats him. Now it's possible Jake Paul would, even if losing to JJ, would continue regardless. Which wouldn't surprise me because there's a lot of money in sports like boxing. And if you're a name and a draw, you can besmirch the sport all day as long as you're getting paid for it. Many people did think Ben Askren stood a chance against Jake Paul. I myself was one of them because he had a decent background. But at the same time, with what little we've seen of Jake Paul, you do have to recognise he does carry some power. And he is very clinical, which is quite annoying because I want him to 100% suck, and all I've got is 75%, with 74% of that being his mouth. As a final thing, I feel sorry for anyone who paid to watch that fight, because it was so short. It was clipped and shared on Twitter via dozens of videos, which would have saved many people a lot of unnecessary expenditure especially when people are still struggling to get by courtesy of COVID. One last thing. If the accusations levied against Jake Paul amount to anything concrete and it goes anywhere, I may well comment on it, but for now, I just want the police to be involved so it can be properly dealt with.